Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. As you have no doubt seen earlier today, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation unveiled 13 separate indictments against Russian citizens who allegedly tried to meddle in the 2016 election. You're going to hear a massive amount of propaganda about those indictments and what they mean in coming days. So we've looked at them carefully, and here's what seems to be true about them. The indictments describe a Russian effort to, quote, sow discord in the American political system. This effort began in 2014. That was, of course, before Donald Trump or any other candidate had declared for the presidential race. The effort didn't seem to have a particular ideological agenda. The point was to stir up trouble. During the 2016 race, these 13 Russians allegedly ran Facebook ads and tried to organize events that criticized Hillary Clinton and supported Donald Trump. But the Russians also supported some left-wingers like Bernie Sanders and Black Lives Matter. Hillary Clinton was the front-runner for most of the race, and they wanted to yank her chain, and they did. But once the election was over, the Russians immediately started organizing rallies against Donald Trump. Rallies, though, is probably an overstatement. An anti-Muslim event, for example, allegedly organized by the Russians, drew a total of 4 RSVPs. An anti-Hillary event in New York got just 45. The only really successful event the Russians appeared to have pulled off seems to be an anti-Trump rally in New York City after the election right outside Trump Tower. Now, all of this is annoying. Obviously, they're foreigners, but none of it seems momentous. Here's what's not in the indictments: any evidence at all that any Russian behavior changed a single vote or did anything to sway the election in any direction. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein admitted as much today. Watch.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
In a statement this afternoon, the White House even boasted about today's news. Quote, President Donald J. Trump has been fully briefed on this matter and is glad to see the special counsel's investigation further indicates that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And that's basically true. Close to 20 people have been indicted in this investigation so far. Still not a single piece of evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Putin. Collusion, you'll remember, was the reason we supposedly needed this multi-year, multi-million-dollar investigation in the first place, the one that has basically ground Washington to a halt and put your concerns on the back burner. And yet the evidence unearthed so far suggests precisely the opposite of collusion. Today's indictments say the Russians made contact with, quote, unwitting Trump supporters and campaign members. Now some journalists are scrambling to revise their previous claims. They're backing off collusion. Time columnist and NYU professor Ian Bremmer tweeted this today, a ludicrous claim, quote, nobody plausible ever said there was a case for collusion. Really? Democrats in Congress have been saying that out loud for more than a year, very often live on this show, so that's a lie. But at least we know what our federal agents have been doing recently, why they were too busy to stop school shootings. They've been chasing down bad Facebook trolls. Today, the FBI admitted it was given explicit warning that Nicholas Cruz could be planning a massacre, but they never even followed up on that. If only someone had told them Cruz was talking to Vladimir Putin, they would have been on it, presumably. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley joins us tonight. Professor, Facebook trolls? I mean, I'm not for that, but I'm a little disappointed that that appears to be the sum total of this.
Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? I mean, you wonder whether Putin's back in Moscow watching the Women's March and saying, well, those 12 guys really did a lot. I mean, you didn't really have to send these guys to the United States to divide us politically. That was sort of a pre-existing condition. What's also amazing is how gratuitous this is, you know, that after the election they start throwing protests on opposing sides. And it's just striking how little really could have been accomplished by this. But at the end of the day, the most interesting thing about this indictment is one adjective: unwitting. You know, after a year, after all these plea agreements, after all these interviews, they really don't have any evidence of anyone knowingly engaging with Russians, not even mentioning the Trump Tower meeting where they knew they were Russians. So there doesn't seem to be any there after a year.
So we're getting close to 20 indictments so far, and none of them speak directly to the underlying charges. I mean, their perjury, their money laundering, their failure to register as a foreign agent. I mean, I'm not saying they're insignificant, but they're skirting the edge of insignificant. Are we going to get actual charges against anybody, would you say?
Well, that is what's also striking about this. The charges themselves are actually quite conventional. Things like identity theft, which is very common with Russian sources, hacking. What isn't conventional, obviously, is the context. This is one of the largest indictments for trying to interfere with an election. It's just that the evidence of any success in that seems quite minimal. I mean, people have criticized Rod Rosenstein for saying there was no evidence of this impacting the election, but I think that what he was saying was this: we haven't really found anything quite significant in these activities. Now, having said that, we should be concerned about the hacking that went on. I think that was the most significant act.
Yes. I should say that we're watching the president and his wife in Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, Florida. They're down there in the aftermath, obviously, of the school shooting 2 days ago with police. If I could just wrap this up, Professor, is this kind of what we're going to see? I mean, and by the way, I'm not downplaying. It's offensive that foreign countries attempt to influence our elections. They influence our policy all the time. They're doing it now. I hate all of it. But do you think that we're going to get to a point where it becomes, we sort of give up looking for evidence of collusion between the campaign and the government?
Well, it would seem odd for this to go on much longer if they don't have any evidence they can cite in any of these indictments. This is just the last indictment.
Right.
So I think we'll all be looking to see whether he's going to bring some closure.
Okay. Professor, we're going to go to the president now. Thank you very much for that.
What a job you've done. And the doctors did a great job over the hospital. A combination which is incredible, and I hope you're getting the credit for it, because believe me, you deserve it. The job you've done is unparalleled.
I'm giving them all raises.
Give them a raise. Get everybody.
Mr. President, these are the leaders. They led SWAT teams, they led staging areas, they led command posts. These are the leaders who led the first responders for police and fire, our deputies who were able to do the amazing things we did in Broward County. So these men and women are, and we're so appreciative and honored that you and the First Lady would come down and spend time in Broward County and let us know what it means to you. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. You did fantastic. And I know Broward very well. I've been here many times. I don't live very far away. I'm right up the road. And we actually drove down. We landed over at Palm Beach International. We drove down. And this was supposed to take place on Sunday or Monday, and I said, no way. And then Marco said, hey, he wants to go down early too. We didn't want to wait. We didn't want to wait. Maybe we could ask you each to say your name and a little bit about what you do. You have a lot of folks here. I'd like to get the world to see the great job that you've done. So the governor of Florida, we all know, Rick Scott has done a fantastic job. Fantastic governor. Truly a state that's doing well. We know that, Rick, right?
Yep.
So I just want to thank you. Now you'd like to say something.
First off, I want to thank you for coming down. As soon as it happened, Kristen Nielsen called me and made sure if there's any federal resources.
Of course, the president and his wife in Broward County, Florida, in the aftermath of that horrifying shooting. Well, it's a short time ago we spoke with the White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah. Here's the conversation. Raj Shah joins us tonight from the White House. So, Raj, these indictments say that Russian interference began in 2014. Do you see these 13 indictments as vindication for you?
We absolutely do. Really, there's three main points that we see from these indictments. One, as you mentioned, they started, this plot started in 2014 before the president jumped into the race. What we also saw is that they proved that there's no collusion. The biggest point that the president's been making since before this investigation even began. The last point that this investigation, or rather these indictments make clear, is that all these efforts were about sowing confusion in the electoral process and undermining the next president, not about supporting one candidate over the other. And so really, when you see these efforts by Democrats, they're pushing this collusion conspiracy. What they're really doing is doing the dirty work for the Russians for them. The media and the Democrats making false claims are really pushing what the Russians want them to push.
I think that's true. Also, paradoxically, it looks like Robert Mueller, who has been seen as an enemy of the White House, is helping the White House's case tonight.
I think that's right. We've always been cooperative with the special counsel's investigation. While the president has said that it's a hoax, that the charge of collusion is false, he would be the one to know. We've still been cooperative. We've still provided witnesses, documents, etc. And now it's helped uncover this elaborate plot, within many Russian individuals that had no cooperation, active cooperation with the Trump campaign. And it really shows that what Democrats have alleged, have charged, and frankly made really outlandish claims about is totally baseless.
But it also sets a kind of interesting precedent because, as you well know, living in Washington, there's a lot of foreign interference into our politics. The Mexican government, for example, has run voter registration drives at American consulates. That seems like an obvious effort to influence election outcomes. Do you think there are going to be indictments there?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I wouldn't pledge to know exactly what statutes, may or may not have been violated by other efforts. I would say that the only plot of actual active collusion between a 2016 campaign and a foreign government was Hillary Clinton's government when it was operating out of the Ukrainian embassy in collusion with the DNC and trying to drop opposition research on Donald Trump and on members of the president's campaign. So, there are examples of foreign influence in campaigns, and there is an example of collusion in the last campaign. It just has nothing to do with this president and his campaign.
So, but would you concede that we're spending a lot of time examining, and I don't think it's bad, but Russian influence on our country, our society, our politics? Do you think this is going to kick off a new era where we take a close look at the influence of a lot of other countries on our politics? And if not, why not?
Well, I think, the issue of foreign influence in American elections is a serious one. It's a real one. You just mentioned one example. I'm sure there are many others. Look, I think we want, of course, we want to ensure that there's integrity in our election process, that individuals who are voting, for example, are all registered citizens. That's an issue the president has raised. And he initiated a commission last year through an executive order to look at the integrity of our election process. We hope that this is just one step in that overall effort to make sure that our elections are clean and fair and influenced by Americans first and foremost.
Raj Shah from the White House, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Carter Page advised the Trump campaign and was later monitored by the federal government, who treated him like a spy. He joins us tonight. Carter, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So just to get this out of the way at the outset, did you help any of these indicted Russians set up fake Facebook pages or plan any of their sparsely attended rallies for them?
The only Facebook shenanigans that were happening with state-sponsored media was Radio Free Europe. They published this fake news from the Dodgy dossier in September 2016, and that was rebroadcasted by a sponsored media outlet, Radio Free Europe, which is sponsored by Broadcasting Board of Governors out of Washington. So that's the closest I ever had with any sort of government-sponsored news outlet. So no.
So you're an Annapolis graduate. You were a naval intelligence officer for 5 years. Presumably that marks you as a patriotic American. Did you ever imagine that your government would be spying on you at any point?
Well, I had some warnings about that back in starting in the summer of 2016 and into September. And actually, when I sent my letter to Director Comey on September 25th, 2016, I immediately called this out as a witch hunt, and so I had some advance warning about that. And I also warned him about, and I said, instead of allowing the staff of the FBI to focus limited resources on real threats, these desperate and unfounded calls for my investigation as a private citizen are a true disgrace. And unfortunately, as we saw this week down in Florida, that prediction turned out to be absolutely correct. So instead of focusing on some of these real threats out there, they were wasting a tremendous amount of money, time, and resources on this complete witch hunt.
And violating your civil liberties. Now, one of the reasons they were able to get a FISA warrant to break into your life and spy on you is because of the Steele dossier, which we reread last week, because why not? And in it, I'd forgotten that there was the allegation that you received a percentage of a Russian company, shares in that company, which would be worth about $11 billion. And so I guess the obvious question is, did you ever get $11 billion from the Russians for spying on the United States, for betraying your country?
I'm still waiting for that, Tucker. And actually, it's funny. The company that did end up acquiring those shares is Glencore, and that was founded by Mark Rich, who was pardoned by, in the last days of the Clinton administration. So they
on the
they
last
know
day,
quite a
I
bit.
think,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That's so. I mean, I don't want to get into a lot of pathos here. I don't even know you. I've never talked to you before tonight, but I've just been wondering as I watch you. Again, as an Annapolis graduate and a former naval officer, having your life destroyed by the U.S. government, like, what do you do for money, and how much has this cost you, and what has this done to your life? I keep thinking that.
Tucker, the last major intelligence failure by the U.S. intelligence community led to deaths of thousands of U.S. military officers and soldiers and airmen. So to me, this is a minor cost. And so I'm just thankful that this false intelligence that was put into the bloodstream of the U.S. government was not followed up on. And, President Trump was able to call this out for the complete lies and misinformation that it was.
Well, I'm sorry you never got the $11 billion in blood money that Steele claims you did. Carter Page, thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker. You too.
Well, more analysis of today's indictments and what went wrong at the FBI. A former agent tells us next. In a wave of indictments today, Robert Mueller's special investigation has exposed meddling in American politics, but none of the electoral collusion that supposedly justified the special counsel that has taken over all of our lives. John Daniel Davidson is a senior correspondent at The Federalist and a careful observer of this whole saga, and he joins us tonight. John, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, the White House is saying this kind of settles the question of collusion because it says explicitly that there wasn't. But I thought the rest of us, acting on common sense, would have concluded that when the U.S. government, led by President Trump, started killing Russians in Syria, that's not the behavior of a Russian agent, right?
Right. Let's be clear about something. The Mueller indictment today and the Mueller investigation generally isn't going to prove or disprove anything definitively. That's not the purpose of the Mueller investigation. The purpose is to investigate to what extent did Russia try to meddle in our electoral process. And careful observers saw back in 2016, even late 2015, that indeed Russian trolls were trying to interfere on social media and create noise and controversy. It was obvious if you looked close enough. So the fact that Russian troll farms were trying to meddle in our election shouldn't be news, but the indictment is a good reminder that that was happening. I just think we have to be careful. The Mueller investigation isn't going to prove or disprove anything about whether or not someone in Trump's campaign
here's my perspective. Look, I'm not surprised the Russians did all. They've been doing this for 100 years. But where I sit in D.C., you have the Mexican government, which has massive influence on our immigration policy. You have the Saudi government, which has massive influence on our foreign policy, pushing us toward war in Syria and Lebanon. And it's working, and nobody ever says anything about it. And yet we're mad about Russian Facebook accounts. I mean, it's insane to me, anyway.
Well, obviously, the impetus behind the special counsel, the impetus behind this whole investigation was partisan from the get-go, and that's what we're finding out more and more with this congressional probe of the FISA warrants and the authorizations that the FBI got to spy on Carter Page, who you just spoke to. So the impetus was no doubt partisan, but it's exposing something that, as you say, is probably more common than most Americans realize. It's not a bad thing to be aware of it. It's not a bad thing to sort of shine a light on it. But maybe what will come out of this, the positive thing that can come out of this, is that we're all more aware and we pay more attention to the ways in which foreign governments try to influence our elections, try to influence our elected leaders and whatever administration happens to be in power in Washington.
So next time censors working for the Chinese government control the content of our Hollywood films, I hope someone says something about it, because it happens all the time. John, thank you. Great to see you.
Thanks.
The FBI was able to catch Russian Facebook trolls, but they couldn't stop American school shooter Nicholas Cruz despite multiple and repeated warnings. Something's wrong at the FBI. We'll tell you what when we return. The FBI conceded today that it completely missed a number of opportunities to stop the Parkland, Florida school shooter Nicholas Cruz. These weren't just minor hints or oblique clues. These were blaring warnings. The Bureau was warned last month about Cruz's erratic behavior, about his owning a lot of guns and his desire to kill people, but they did nothing. They didn't follow up. That's in addition to a failure to catch Cruz after receiving a tip in September. But as many have pointed out recently, the FBI has bigger matters on its hands than protecting school children from murderers.
Is it possible, ladies and gentlemen, that the FBI may not have the resources to deal with complaints like this? How many people at the FBI are still trying to prove that Trump colluded with Russia? Hillary Clinton and the Democrats have the FBI so occupied tracking down something that didn't happen, they may not have the resources to pull this kid off the street.
Tim Clemency is a former FBI special agent, and he joins us tonight. Tim, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
It seems like an awful lot of people knew that Cruz was a potential threat. I think local police went to his house 39 times in response to complaints. The FBI received a couple of pretty explicit tips about him and didn't follow up. All of us want to think the best of the FBI. What do you think happened here?
Tucker, I still think the best of the FBI as an agency and as the premier law enforcement and investigative body in the world, but that doesn't mean there aren't fatal flaws within the system and the personnel that are there. They're all human beings make mistakes, and I'm hoping this was a mistake. I'm hoping this was a clerical error where somebody took a phone call, wrote out a lead, and then the lead somehow didn't get into the system and not sent down to the Miami division where it could have been acted on. I'm hoping that's what happened. Worst case is that a human being read this information, heard this information, was given it over the phone, and decided that they were the final arbiter and they didn't need to send it any further. And I'm really hoping that Director Wray, being a new director to the FBI, in this a very, very bad period of turmoil for the FBI, will allow himself to do a very public examination of this problem and reveal it to the public so that the public can have confidence again. Unfortunately, the FBI has been overwhelmingly politicized in the last few years, as we've seen with McCabe and some of the other characters at headquarters acting as, like Politburo members, not as investigative members of the FBI.
Well, that's the way it looks. I agree. And I want to think the best of Director Wray as well. But then he comes out and issues this statement today in which he sort of lectures us by saying, the men and women who work here really have the safety of Americans as their first priority. In other words, we have the best intentions. Not that I really care about their intentions, I care about what they do, but I don't even believe that, given the Strzok and Page text that we've all read. Why would he say something so obviously false?
Well, I think he's probably reeling from what's happened not only today and what happened earlier this week with this horrific mass murder, but also with what's happened to the FBI and its reputation because of people like Strzok, Page, McCabe, and others. I mean, they clearly exhibited what were the least objective traits of any human being. And I worked under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents as an FBI agent, and there were things that I found out about specifically the Clinton administration when I was working there, that I still to this day would not reveal publicly because it would be embarrassing to the office that I was working under as an FBI agent.
Right.
But these individuals see that it's their mission to be politically active in their job, and that's horrific. And so I'm hoping that, again, that this was a problem and an administrative problem, because what happens is you call the FBI, it's not a 911 system, some duty agent or a support person would answer the phone, try and route your phone call to the people that would be most most appropriate to handle it. And that might be a very junior agent or a very senior agent, but it might be somebody that doesn't know what to do with the information. And in this case, it would seem it would be very likely, if the individual you're talking about is in Miami, that you would tell the Miami division so a lead could be generated for agents to follow up. Obviously, that never happened, and lives were lost because of it.
Well, they were busy tracking down those fake Russian Twitter accounts. Tim, thank you for that. I appreciate your experience view. Well, almost everybody apparently knew that Nicholas Cruz was disturbed. All of his neighbors knew. Several people reported him to the FBI. The FBI special agent in charge, Robert Lasky, says the Bureau simply failed to act somehow. Here's his explanation.
The caller provided information about Nicholas Cruz and the potential of him becoming a school shooter. Under normal protocol, this information should have been provided to the Miami field office. The FBI has determined that protocol was not followed. The information was not provided to the Miami field office, and no further investigation was conducted at that time. We truly regret any additional pain that this has caused.
Tammy Bruce is a radio show host, one of our favorites. She joins us tonight. Tammy, I don't think a lot of us, most of us anyway, ask much from the FBI. I mean, I don't want them, to fix my marriage or sort of make me happy or, combat fake Russian Twitter accounts. I do want them to pay attention to potential school shooters. This is a core mission. It ought to be of any law enforcement agency. How did this happen?
This is what's so shocking to the American people. We first started out with this news, this horrific news, with a feeling that we were living in chaos, that there was no rhyme or reason, that for some reason, despite all of our efforts, these things still happen. But the fact of the matter is, Tucker, the citizenry did their job. They reported it. The students at the school recognized what he was turning into. The neighbors, even an elementary school student that went to elementary school with him called him evil. The school actually managed to expel him, which is not easy to some degree. And yet, and then we have the YouTube blogger, and we have whoever this other individual was in January turning him in. The universe did its job. The citizenry, the normals, did their job in recognizing him and stating it and vocalizing it. And when it got to the federal level, Tucker, they shrugged. It's not like they missed it. I hear this in describing that they missed it or it was a failed opportunity. They had the information. They didn't miss anything. There was a deliberate decision somewhere to not follow up. And even when we know when this fellow bought his gun, you don't need, when he was on social media using his real name, and we're not even law enforcement, but we know that, look, wouldn't you run the name through everybody who got a background check to purchase a firearm? Then you would have found him. You would at least, it would take whatever, 5 minutes to put the order in to run the background check.
Right.
These are the things that we know exist. We saw something, we said something. So here's the problem, Tucker, is when we're told that there's going to be more information, we should do more, we should have more laws, and none of it will matter if when we get to the federal level, everything collapses. So this is not only should Ray resign, but this is malfeasance that has contributed at least to the death of 17 people. We have to start looking criminal.
Efforts to pass immigration reform are breaking down completely in the Senate. Well, the White House is willing to grant amnesty for about 2 million people. The Senate voted down deals to do that, as many senators insisted on opposing the proposals that would have strengthened border security or ended the diversity lottery. Ultimately, the left's desire to allow more illegal immigrants to enter the country overpowered any interest in protecting the Dreamers from deportation. Raul Reyes is an attorney, and he joins us tonight. Raul.
Good evening.
So good evening. So just the first thing, which I can't resist bringing up to you, every news account I've read about the failure of this deal to go through begins by saying the future of the Dreamers remains in limbo, and I should be very concerned about that. And I do feel bad for them, actually. But a lot of Americans have lives in limbo because they're addicted to drugs, or they're unemployed, or they're in poverty, as a lot of our country is outside the cities. Why should I think that the plight of people who shouldn't be here in the first place and have no legal right to be here is more important than the suffering of my own countrymen, which is being shoved aside in order to address their concerns? I'm confused.
Right. Well, I think the way, in my view, the answer to that question is that one group of people is not necessarily more important than the others. When people talk about the Dreamers being in limbo, that's because of these court decisions. We don't know what their status is going to be of the program. Because of the failure in Congress to come to an agreement this week, we don't know if there's going to be any consensus about what to do about their status going forward. And I think when people ask me why should we care about them, what I generally say in terms of like the larger debate going on in the country is because that's what most Americans, they want it solved. They want them to be allowed to stay, legalize, or path
I think
to
that's
citizenship.
right. No, but let me.
And
I
so
agree. Look,
most people just want it settled.
But hold on. Yeah, I think that's that's probably right. But there was a report out last week that showed for the second year in a row, life expectancy for the entire American working class went down for the first time in American history 2 years in a row. The coverage of that has been, let's see, none. And the coverage of the plight of illegal aliens in the country has been overwhelming. So again, it's a matter of proportion. Like I understand it's a concern. Most people want to get it done, whatever. But is that more important than figuring out why actual Americans are dying younger by the millions? Do you see my concern here?
No, of course. And actually, I mean, I think for all of us in this country, that's something we all have, our family members and our seniors. That's something we should, to your point, we should all care about. I think our country, though, especially our government, is capable of doing both. We can take care of our own citizens and look into some of these problems, and we can also address this system we have right now. I think you and I agree that in a sense our immigration system is broken.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's broken. I don't know. I mean, it seems like if you thought the law was real, you would act on it. If you're not allowed to be in this country, you can leave and apply legally. Why is that a bad solution? Why do we write laws that we ignore? Isn't the whole message of this the system is a joke and laws don't matter?
No, I don't think the system is a joke. I mean, especially for these young people, their futures, as you mentioned, their futures are hanging in the balance. They are very concerned about whether they're going to be deported or whether they're going to be allowed to stay. It's a big question mark. I don't think the system is a joke. I think where we are right now is that there is consensus in the American public that we should let these people stay here. Congress has not been able to move past the question of how to solve that problem. And part of the thing, in my view, part of what complicates this is that Donald Trump, whatever you think of him, he's been sort of an unreliable negotiator, because on one hand he's saying he wants a bill of love and he'll take the heat for something that would allow them to stay. And then this week we saw he went back to the 4 pillars, which was a very hardline approach. And I think it would be easier for both sides if he were willing to stake out a consistent approach rather than going back and forth.
No, look, the argument was what to do about the Dreamers, the DACA recipients, about 700,000 people. Trump said, you know what, I'll let 2 million stay. Democrats said that's not enough. You need to legalize all 12 million. But why not? Here's my solution. How about everyone who is in violation of the law and doesn't have a legal right to be here can leave and then apply, because we let in 1 million people legally every year. Why doesn't every person here illegally leave tonight? Some of them won't like it, but it is our law. And then they can come back if they get in legally. Why is that not an option?
Well, I think for 2 reasons. Number one, for the economic disruption it would cause, if we had all these people leave. And for many of these people, what happens, the way our laws are set up right now, if they are here illegally and they go, say, if they self-deport, so to speak, and go back home and try and come back, there's on the law they're barred for a minimum of between 3 to 10 years from even applying to come back. And those people do not want to be Dreamers, do not want to do that. So that's sort of a realistic,
they don't want to be inconvenienced. I get it.
For them doing it.
So people who came here illegally don't want to be hassled. Right. Okay.
Well, no. So they don't want to go through that.
Why would they? Hilarious. All right. Filmmaker Rob Reiner has been shouting for months about Russia's cyber invasion of America, using the word treason. How does he respond to today's indictments? He joins us next. Stay tuned.
We have been attacked. We are at war. Imagine this movie script. A former KGB spy, angry at the collapse of his motherland, plots a course for revenge.
Filmmaker Rob Reiner has spent months sounding the alarm about Russia. Last fall, he helped make that video, and of course, he is very excited about today's indictments. Today, he tweeted this, quote, "It's now crystal clear that Russia had a profound impact on the 2016 election. They have attacked us. They're continuing to attack us. If Trump is unwilling to acknowledge this and unwilling to protect us, the word treason is now center stage. Rob Reuner joins us tonight. Rob, good to see you.
Hey, Tucker, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I would think that after reading this series of indictments, the one that say the Russians supported Trump, attacked Hillary, the Russians also supported Black Lives Matter and Bernie, the Russians also had an anti-Trump rally in front of Trump Tower, you'd be a little embarrassed by tweets like this and your hysteria generally, are you?
No, but here's the thing, Tucker. Everybody out there knows that you and I are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. I mean, that we all know that. So what I'm thinking right now is you and I together, because we're so far apart politically, we have an opportunity here to do a great service to the country. If all we have to do, and this is not about whether or not there's collusion or whether or not whatever the Russians did definitely or didn't affect the outcome of the election, all you and I have to do at this point is agree with what Rod Rosenstein said today. Do you agree with that or no?
I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't like foreign countries meddling in our affairs. I don't like that you tailor your movies to the Chinese censors' specifications, as you know you do. So I don't like any kind of foreign interference at all. I find it all offensive. I'm just saying when you accuse somebody of treason, I've heard you come out against McCarthyism, and to see you engage in it, treason, unpatriotic, you use phrases like that. Why would you do that?
No, I didn't accuse him of treason. What I said
yes, you did.
Is no. What I said was, if he is refusing to acknowledge the fact that the Russians did attack us during the election, and if he refuses to do anything about it, then you're conspiring with an enemy. And that's all I'm saying.
Okay, but can I ask you, are you aware that... Okay, that you want something to do, but we're now killing Russians in Syria. Trump killed a bunch of them last week. Were you happy about that? Were you excited that he killed Russians?
I'm not talking about... We're not talking about the Russians in Syria or what happened in Syria. We're talking about...
No, but were you excited? He killed Russians in Syria. What did you think of that?
I don't have an opinion about that. I know I know is what... No, I don't. All I know is what has happened is that we've been invaded, and they continue to do to try to disrupt our democracy. And like you just pointed out early, you know, they'll go on both sides. They'll try to help Bernie, Jill Stein,
do you think the Russians,
anything to disrupt the democracy.
Do you think the Russians have more influence in our country than the Chinese government, to which you routinely kowtow in your films? Do you honestly, you look at the camera and say the Russians have more effect, on American society than the Chinese government? Do you believe that?
But wait a minute. Why did you say that I kowtow to them in my films? I don't know what that means.
Because Hollywood films, as you know, would never have a flattering portrayal of the Dalai Lama, for example, because the Chinese government doesn't want it. American films are routinely censored, or they go along with the imperatives of the Chinese government censors. You know this. You live there. I mean, you're not going to deny that, I assume, because it's true.
But you're saying that I censor myself for the Chinese. I don't do that. I don't know what else happens from everybody else. But all I'm saying, Tucker, well, I don't. But here's the thing, Tucker. All I'm saying is, if you and I can agree, all we have to do is agree that the Russians try to meddle and disrupt our democracy. That's all we have to agree on. If we can't agree on that...
I've thought that for years. I thought the Rosenbergs were guilty. You know what I mean? No, I'm serious. I think the Russians have done that for years. I think many countries do it.
Yeah, but, there's no question about it. They do it.
Right.
They do it, and the Russians have been doing it for years. The only difference between what they have done, which is they call active measures and disinformation campaigns, the only difference between what they've been doing for years and now is that it's on steroids because of the internet and because of social media. So it's a much more powerful effect of what they've been able to accomplish
right.
now.
Will you agree that you probably shouldn't call people unpatriotic or treasonous on your Twitter account? Can we just agree on that note?
Well, I wouldn't say they're unpatriotic or treasonous unless they're not willing to protect our country against foreign enemy powers. That's all. And let's see. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll change his mind.
Maybe he'll be a patriot in your mind. All right, we're out of time. Rob, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right, Tucker.
Some people are so excited about the new movie, The Black Panther, they're refusing to see it. Interesting story just ahead.